It's nice to see you again. Thank you for joining another program of Different Voices, Shared Visions. If this is the first time you've joined us, we're really just delighted to have three perspectives presented, usually around a different issue. The perspective are those of the Jewish religion, the Christian religion, the Islamic religion, all of which have the same basic roots, I would say. We're called the Abrahamic religions. We all share a common foundation. And we will have a lawyer, a preacher, and a professor, a Jewish lawyer, a Christian preacher, and a Muslim professor. And I asked them before we started who is the most truthful? Who would you trust more? A lawyer, a preacher, or a professor? And maybe they'll be able to share that information with you tonight anyway. I'll have them introduce themselves shortly. But the topic of our discussion today is a bit more serious than I've been so far. It's the subject of truth, telling the truth. And I would guess everybody who is watching us today had a mother or a father, or preferably both, who made it a fairly significant issue as we were growing up that we tell the truth, the importance of telling the truth. And so I would guess all of us watching, and certainly all of us on the panel, recognize that telling the truth is one of the predominantly important aspects of human social intercourse. If you don't have truth, you do not have trust. And if you cannot trust a person or what somebody says, it's very hard to live in a civilized and governable culture. And yet we are living in a time, the reason we thought of this subject this time is because there is so much conversation in the public media and in public conversation generally about a lack of truth-telling. At this point, we're maybe close to 130 days into the term of our new president, all of our president. He represents us. He leads all of us. And yet, when he turned 100 days in office, he had, according to numerous accounts, already told 492 lies, untruths. More recently, it's well over 500 at this point. And so the question arises among us, who can you trust anymore? Who tells the truth anymore? How do you even define the truth? So we thought maybe the best way to begin the process of determining truth, discussing truth and the importance of truth, is to sort of define it. And it's a question that philosophers have debated and discussed for centuries. A typical philosophical definition of truth is one that says there has to be four components to it. One is what they call congruency, that somehow it fits with the facts, with our own experience, that it's consistent, that it doesn't have any inconsistencies or contradictions within itself, that it's coherent, namely that it fits with everything else that we consider to be true, and that it's useful, that somehow if we consider this a truth, we know that it will be a good foundation for making decisions in our life as it continues. It gives us mastery. We operate on the basis of truth. Now that's the way the philosophers say it. Normal people like you and me simply say it this way. It's truth if it corresponds with the evidence, that is, the facts sustain it and support it. It's true if it makes sense, that it doesn't contradict itself, and it's true if it works in the real world. So that's kind of a simpler way of saying how we define the truth and how we'll sort of define it for our conversation today. The mischief sometimes comes with who do we use as a source of truth? Because not everybody uses the same sources of truth. The predominant source of truth, I think, in our culture and most Western cultures, we would call a scientific truth. That is, things that are reality that's based on the five senses. Can you smell it, feel it, hear it, see it, touch it, and measure it somehow? Then that gives you the facts that allows you to make judgments based on empirical or scientific truth. There's also secular authority truth. people who have high standing in a culture or something. What they say you believe because you trust them and you think they tell the truth. What we are going to limit our discussion to today is religious authority or religious truth, and how our religions share the same or different understandings of the importance of truth, what truth is, and how truth then is lived out in each of our lives. Now, with that long introduction, I'd like to have the lawyer introduce himself first.
Thank you, Dan. My name is Rob Wertheimer. I am a lawyer in Hudson, Wisconsin, and I am Jewish. My mother is a child Holocaust survivor. She was a hidden child during World War II, and I live with my family in Hudson, practicing law and participating in these shows.
And now the preacher.
Yeah, thanks. My name is Dean Simpson, pastor at Grace Lutheran Church in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. And it's interesting, I serve a congregation that a few years ago, I like to say crashed and burned. I mean, it got so controversial and divided that it was just disastrous for the congregation. And the debate was over what is the proper or true understanding of our faith and the scriptures and the teachings of the prophets and of Jesus and so on. So the question of truth sounds positive, but it can take a real nasty negative turn. And I've been there about 2.5 years, and we're trying to sort of come back from a difficult place. It's challenging work these days, and very engaged there, so it's interesting. It's good to be here today.
Good to have you. And now the professor.
Thank you, Dan. I'm Sean Killich, and I work at the University of Wisconsin, River Falls. I'm a professor, not just a teacher. We do also some scientific research. Usually, being a university professor isn't related to teaching. It's not just teaching, just to want to make a remark. And we live in River Falls, and so it's been now 12 years we've been here, and we call River Falls as our home.
Well, okay, now you have seen them all and listened to them all. Are you making any preliminary judgments as to the truthfulness of them all? Why don't we start with this question? By the way, my name is Dan Brook. I was remembering while they introduced themselves that I have, and I'm a retired cleric and academic living in Hudson also. And again, thank you for joining us. So, Rob, why don't we start with you in terms of the Jewish understanding of truth, the importance of it, sort of how it's first mentioned in the Jewish scriptures.
Well, what I have some little research I did, I suppose. And in Judaism, there is a strong belief in an absolute truth which exists in the world. And that truth with a capital T is the key which unlocks the riddle of our existence, the purpose in the world. And that truth is in the Torah, or the Jewish Bible. And it's called the Torah of Truth, Toras Emes. And they say this is because God is the God of truth, and the Torah is said to be His thoughts and the revelation of His purpose in the creation of the universe. And so Jews are strongly encouraged throughout the Torah and the rest of the commandments to be in constant pursuit of the truth, to constantly be studying the Torah and interpreting it. And not so, it's kind of a lifetime struggle to understand that you may never actually reach the answer, but the very process of seeking and trying to find the answers to what God's word is and what God's purpose is in itself supposedly a spiritual act. And by pursuing the truth or the word of God in the Torah, we are supposed to be drawing ourselves nearer to God, to make a connection with God. And again, it's a lifelong effort, this quest for truth, and it's a deepening of our faith through that connection. And on the way, we're supposed to learn all about ourselves in Judaism. So, and then there's like the day-to-day part of it, that God acts truthfully in that he keeps his word. And so human truthfulness is to be faithful to God and man, and to speak the truth in one's heart, to quote correctly, to engage in commerce honestly, and to abstain from all deceit and hypocrisy. And so God is truth, and Judaism a whole is the practice of truth. So that's kind of the summary in my research of that. And I think, part of that is that there is a strong encouragement for learning, either throughout the Jewish teachings, as well as a strong cultural bias towards a lot of education and schooling and learning. And so getting closer to God is getting closer to the truth. And it's a lifelong trip, and you may not get all the answers all the way, but as you approach it, you're getting that much closer to your faith and to the understanding of what God's purpose for you is. They call it a hidden treasure.
When you were growing up as a little boy, did your mother insist on you telling the truth? Was it a big part of your growing up?
Yes, there was a strong, it was very important in our household to always tell the truth and to be honest with dealings with people and things like that.
So you're all parents. Does it seem to come naturally to our children to want to not tell the truth? Have you ever heard of any parent who had a child that they didn't need to teach to tell the truth? It doesn't seem to come naturally. True or false?
Yeah. All right.
Doesn't seem to come naturally, does it? We're sort of predisposed to lie.
Has to be taught, I believe. Yeah.
And why do you think that is? That a little child, 2 years old, don't touch, will touch, and if you say, "Did you touch?" he or she'll say no. Why do you think that is? I mean, we may be dealing with a topic here that's just insurmountable in terms of trying to improve. What do you think?
I don't know, maybe it could be explained with the human nature. That's the human nature, which means we are inclined to interpret everything according our interest, according our perspectives, and that's what really matters. And if we think something is against our interest, we will rather not say or say it differently. And that's the human nature. And I believe, and I sincerely believe, that religions are, we talk about Abrahamic religions, and the revelations are because of the human nature. God knows us. He has created us, and He knows our nature. He just wants to tell us that our interpretation of truth is not what we think is truth. So we need to be taught, and I think that's the reason why we have those revelations and those religions and prophets according to the Islamic religion. So the sacred writings, and that's what I sincerely believe. It's nothing bad. But it can be taught, and that's the reason why. Because according to Islam, it says, "Haqq is the truth in Islam." Haqq means the essence, the core of something, the core of human life, the core of being created, whatever it is. It says, "Haqq came." The truth came, falsehood was defeated. So falsehood was all apparent, because that's what we want to build our lives on. It doesn't matter. It could be an imaginary life, anything, but it's an eye-opener to read those sacred writings. And when I was doing some research, actually this time I read some passages from the Bible, and because they're matching with what the Quran says. Even though there's some other articles I read about Islam written by Christians. Anyway, so John 17, it says, "Sanctify them by your truth. Your word is truth." It's the same in Islam. His word is truth. He is a truth. So what we want to do, and when we look at the Sufism, those who want to emerge and really become a ideal person, they want to be with the truth, with Haq, which means it's more a Sufi orientation where you want to emerge with that ultimate truth, which is God. So I didn't want to take over.
Well, good. No, that's good. We'll get back and to you again here shortly. How about you Christian folks? You know anything about the truth?
Not a whole lot. Not anymore. I used to think we did, but I'm not sure these days. But we have some alternative truths we'd like to talk about. I was glad, Askan, when you mentioned Sufism. There are Jewish mystics, there are Muslim mystics, there are Christian mystics. And the mystics tend to see the words of Scripture. They look a little deeper, and they see them sort of as pointing to something more transcendent or just beyond the literal meanings of the words themselves.
That's right.
So when we say God is the truth, and in the Gospel of John that you quoted, Jesus is quoted as saying, I am the truth. Now, a lot of scholars think that Jesus would never have said such a thing. That's John putting those words in the mouth of Jesus as he writes the gospel story. Sounds a little bit like alternate facts here, doesn't it? Or fake news or something. But John, the writer of the gospel, as if John is saying, if Jesus were here right now, and he is, John would say, this is what he would want us to know. So it's not fake news, even though those words, exactly as they're recorded in John, may not have come from the lips of Jesus himself. That's sort of scandalous to some Christians to think that. But John's gospel is the only one of the four Gospels where Jesus speaks this way. I am the truth, the way, the life. I am the good shepherd. I am the light of the world. I am the bread of life. Before Abraham was, I am. All the I am sayings are in John. It leads some scholars to think this is John's exposition. It's more like preaching that Jesus is these things. So, but the point is, Christians would also say that God is the truth. It's just that the window onto God that Christians use is Jesus. It's his compassion, it's his love for enemies, it's his willingness to even suffer and die, even for enemies, in forgiveness, that opens up the window into the deepest truth of God that we understand as Christians. So when Jesus says, I am the truth, John would have us understand that he is referring to the way of Jesus, his love for people, his gracious way of dealing with people, that this is the truth of God in the world, rather than God as some warrior or punisher of people. It's a more gracious and inclusive way of understanding truth. So we would say all of our truths that we speak in words about God are relative to the actual truth of God's being, right? Because we all stand in different places in history and in the world, and we've learned something about relative truth from Einstein and others. Now we realize it's hard for us to know absolutely what is the truth. So we all tell the truth from our own point of view. It's not to say that there isn't an absolute truth, but we need to be a little bit humble about our own ability to perceive it and know it clearly. And then we try to tell that truth to ourselves in words, and words don't quite get us all the way to the reality of the truth. And so, like the mystics say, the words are kind of pointers beyond themselves to the reality, which is in some ways a mystery still to us all. So rather than being proud about our religious truths, we are encouraged in Scripture to be humble and to know, as Paul would say, faith and hope and love are great, but the greatest is love. And so love gets us closer to the truth of God than anything else, which is easy to say and hard to practice. So.
Can I build? I didn't want to take over, but when you mentioned beyond words, I think there is some knowledge. And this knowledge cannot just be learned. It has to be infused somehow. And now I remember when you mentioned this, Allah in the Quran, God says, I want it to be known. Therefore, I created the humankind. So He created us to be known. So what happened is when He first created Adam, the angels were there. So He taught Adam all the words. All the words. What does it mean, words? Any type of information, science, what we could know from our positive perspective here. I taught Adam the words. And I asked the angels, tell me what's this word? The angels couldn't answer because they were only inclined to do what God tells them to do. Since God taught Adam all the information, now he has the ability to judge. He has the ability to interpret Adam. And since he was taught the right way, he was able to interpret the right way. So I think it's all about knowledge, but getting to the right knowledge, right? And then seeing the perspective. So otherwise, if we were not taught the truth, then we're just lost. That's how I see it. And that's how I feel about people who are not able to tell the truth or seek the truth or claim to have the truth. I see them, consider them as lost people, and I really pity them. I'm sorry to say that. Whoever that might be. Yeah.
So to just kind of summarize at least this first area of agreement, what you're all saying is that sort of the first rule of trying to approach the concept of truth is to do it with humility, because all three religions agree there is an absolute truth found in God, as God is defined in each of our religions. But inasmuch as none of us are God, that is a chasm fixed over which we cannot jump. So we are not capable of knowing, understanding absolute truth. We only seek it in humility as we seek, according to each of our religious paths, to become closer to God. Is that what you were saying, more or less?
I think that's a good summary.
Yeah, very good.
Well, so what's that being the case, is that what accounts for the fact that in all three of the faiths, there historically have been and continue to be arguments over what is the truth of your religion. And so each of the three religions have segmented
Yes.
into this is God's truth, this is God's truth, this is God's truth. Sometimes have fought, virtually never live in peace. So what's our struggle? Why does that happen?
Well, because like we're talking about, we can try and approach God's truth with a capital T, but being human, we can all, spend our lives reading the Torah and the Bible and trying to get closer to God through that. But even, to use Judaism as an example, you've got the ultra-Orthodox, you've got the more Reformed that take it a little easier, the middle ground. I mean, just looking at the, since our president's was just in the Mideast, looking at that whole situation, and just in Israel, you've got people that are willing to, go back, do some trades with land or do whatever is necessary so we can have peace, and others that won't give an inch back, and they're all different types of Jews, but they still all consider themselves Jewish, and even now around here, there's more of a secular type of Judaism movement that sees it more as an ethnicity. There's some religion involved, but it also has an ethnicity. Even Jared Kushner, the first son-in-law, was looking at the type of religious he's in a modern orthodoxy type of Judaism where they follow the Sabbath, but it's not complete orthodoxy. And I had to look that up because I never grew up with something like that. So I think it's just the different interpretations within our own religions makes it even difficult, let alone trying to get on with other religions and their interpretations of what what's right and what's truth. And I like the idea of the mysticism part of the religion and how it reminds me of a kind of when I was looking through things for today's show about how we're in Judaism, truth can be seen as an ethical notion, not what is, but what ought to be. So peace, righteousness, grace, justice, truth, justice, and peace, things we're striving for, but not always there. And I also thought about how, sometimes people feel they have the truth through this silent knowledge that isn't communicated in words, but, then you're talking about things and it can all be so subjective, but there's just so much divisions just because we're people, we have different thoughts, and we perceive things differently.
So what's the hope then?
Yeah.
Our hope is still in God. I think that's the hope but there's the other saying is that hikmet is there's a term hikmet, the ability to see the truth, to the ability to differentiate from false and right and be on the right path is called hikmet. And I think if someone is really sincere, it doesn't matter which religious belief, if you're really sincere, and I believe in that enlightenment, God will enlighten you, God will infuse into you that hikmet, which means the ability to understand whether I'm saying the truth or that is the truth, or whatever the truth is, the right one, to identify that and follow this. And I think the more sincere we are with ourselves and within our faith, I believe that's the only hope that I'm having for myself and for others. Just the more sincere we are, I think that will prevent us from going to the whatever the abnormal rather than the truth path. And I think it's all about our relationship with our God. Yeah.
I think there's some really hopeful things on the horizon today, and it may have I've never placed a whole lot of stock in sincerity, because you can be sincerely wrong, as people have said. But if you're sincere, then you might be able to be guided into the truth, and that's kind of what you're saying, which is nice, Oskan. And I see something happening today. It's got a negative side, but it's got a very positive side too. And that is that as we get closer together through the internet, through travel, communications, technology, and so on, instead of me being able to define Muslims according to somebody who's never met one and is teaching me about Islam, I get to know a Muslim myself, and I think, well, this is really a great guy. And through communications and travel, the world's getting smaller. We're getting to know each other in the world. And we're learning how sophisticated and spiritual and decent other people of other religious traditions are. And it's causing people to say, oh, they're like us. And the negative side, I think, is people are starting to say that religious teachings or distinctives aren't important, and they tend to want to just flatten them out and make us all the same. I don't think that's a good idea. At the same time, we can look beyond our differences, as we're trying to do in this conversation, and find our commonalities, find our common values, find our common humanity, and the things that we find that the things that unite us are bigger and more important than the things that divide us. Yeah. We love our families, and we want to be good neighbors, and we want the whole world to flourish. And all of those beliefs and values that sort of guide us we're learning other people have those same concerns and values that we do. And so there's something we're coming to understand a deeper truth about each other. And hopefully we're coming to a deeper understanding of our own faith as well. Now I know that there is always a reaction against that. When you sort of start to become more open to other people, there are people of our own traditions who want to put the brakes on and become reactionary and say, oh no, you can't become syncretistic, you can't open the door to these other people because they'll...
It's the same in
ruin the
Islam
truth.
also. We have the criticism also, yeah. I mean,
Yeah. But nevertheless, I think the arc of history is moving toward greater understanding of each other's humanity and a willingness to look deeper for the truth that unites us.
Yeah.
And whether or not we'll get there quickly enough before we destroy ourselves in some way it's kind of a scary question. But I think there is hopefulness in learning the truth about each other.
I have the same hope you have, but believe me, if it's not us, if we're not able to do it, what you mentioned, God will create someone else who will eventually accomplish it. Really. That's how I feel about it. If we fail, maybe we're not in a position to radically change everything, but we're obligated and responsible for making incremental changes and betterments. I think that's what we should do.
Good.
Rather
Yeah,
than
like that.
we can't change it right away. I mean, but I'm hopeful. Yeah, like you, I'm hopeful.
I'm hopeful too.
Yeah.
It is incremental,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
we talked about this before, how on a
Yeah,
local
yeah,
level, and
yeah.
this, we're doing our little
Yeah.
part here,
Yeah.
and just showing that people who get to know each other can
Yeah,
communicate and
yeah.
live in peace. So
Because part of the truth of Judaism, the truth that I learned firsthand, is getting to know you. And I would say, Rob Wertheimer's heart is an expression of the truth of Judaism. It's not just the abstractions, the doctrines, the teachings.
Yeah.
I meet an embodiment of Judaism, and he's a good guy. I could go to you and ask you to solve my legal problem because I would trust you, Rob.
and there's the truth.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Little advertisement for Wertheimer Law here.
So the title of this series is called Different Voices, Shared Visions. So we acknowledge different voices. So what does it take to acknowledge different voices, that there are things that separate us, even though we share the same visions? Does it take a level of, which really is asking, I think, is we've got some disparate truths at this table.
We do.
We don't agree on everything. And yet, in spite of that, we recognize that there is a superior truth that envelops us all.
Yeah.
How long did it take you to get to the point where you could live with that reality that your truth may not be the only one, and that while it works for you, there are other truths that work for other people, even though over it all is a belief in the God that we share?
I don't insist in my own truth. I insist in the overall truth and try to reach to it. I think that's what I'm doing. I wasn't the person I am right now maybe 30 years ago because I had my own truth.
Mm-hmm.
And it had to be that truth and everyone had to agree with that. But I think that's how I have evolved into my adulthood. Now I'm kind of, I would say, middle-aged, right? So, and now I'm seeing the real, that's what really matters is the overall truth. So I'm trying to get closer to the overall, when we say God is the truth, to that truth. That's what I'm towards, and in this regard, as long as you have the same ambitions of reaching to it, you're no different than any other Muslim to me as a Christian. That's how I feel about it. So your individual truth, whatever it is, doesn't really matter to me as long as you have that overall truth in your mind. It doesn't matter.
So would we say that regardless of our religious perspective, the more we grow in understanding of the nature of God and the closer we become to God, the more expansive our understanding of truth is and our ability to accept others even though their truth may vary from ours?
Very good summarized. That's what I want to say, yeah.
I've thought of that often. God gave me a wonderful wife and 4 daughters, and we all have our own sense of truth from time to time,
Yeah.
and it varies over the years. And sometimes family maybe helps us understand
Yeah.
that we don't always have the edge on all truths, and helps us to grow even in our religious convictions in terms of how we deal with others who disagree with us.
I like to think of, I think there is an approach to theological thought that is more aesthetic than analytical. So you think of life and existence as a big musical composition. And you know, how boring would a musical piece be if every note were the same? And so we have harmony.
Very good.
Now, sometimes there's dissonance as well, but dissonance can be a wonderful part of a piece.
Of a composition, right?
So yeah, of a composition. So I don't need to have everybody be Christian. I know each of us kind of have our exclusive claims, but I think we can understand the exclusive claims as pointing to the great truth that unites us all, that we're trying to grasp, and we can't quite grasp it with our minds, but we believe in it, all of us anyway. And so we all have our shared vision and different voices, and those different voices can form a harmony as long as we don't, double up our fist and pick up the knives and go at it.
There's no need.
We can listen to one another, and it can be a beautiful conversation. So religious teaching, religious metaphors and images and poetry can help us develop a more aesthetic approach to trying to know what is real and ultimately true, and give space for others, listen to them, and it can be really harmonious and wonderful without trying to say, well, they all have to be Christian or whatever. So one other thing I want to say about that is that I think my desire, and I would guess all of our desires, is I want to be more deeply Christian. It's easy to be doctrinally Christian without having the character of Christ. I can't imagine the great founders of our religion fighting the other founders who are striving for peace and justice in their place, and then have them fighting like modern believers tend to fight. I know Bill Maher once said, he likes Jesus. He's an atheist, but he likes Jesus, just he wants to be saved from Jesus' followers. So we can't imagine Jesus acting like some of his followers, and we need to be deepened in our religious faith in order to be able to get along. It could be that we're a little too shallow and literal and doctrinaire, and we need to be more spiritual.
And to actually walk the walk of what people preach. And
Exactly, walking the walk.
What's in there. And I also like your music analogy.
Yeah, that's very good. Yeah, the composition.
Especially even in rock, not just classical, you can have all sorts of stuff compounded into it, but yet it can be a really good song.
Yeah.
And it's a Jewish scholar's birthday today, so I thought I'd mention Bob Dylan. So.
Okay.
And there's someone with not a great voice, but he's made so it goes along with your analogy well.
Yeah.
Did he turn 70 now? I think he must be 70 or something. Over 70.
Yeah, he's over 70.
So let's just for a second take a little bit of a side foray into the human condition in the US of A as it presents itself now, and talk about truth within the context of our public discourse, particularly the political discourse. Given this view that we share with regard to truth, what would it take for that view to become predominant, do you think, in our culture as a whole, and therefore reflect itself in the way we govern ourselves?
Truth has just taken such a, how do I put it, a backdoor to the political stage. It's just incredible. I mean, just what's been going on, because even during the campaign, you had all these journalists who would like cite, okay, this is factually incorrect, this is factually incorrect, this is factually incorrect, and it really made very little difference in things happening. And so it's kind of a crazy time politically we're living in. And someone can, promise all these things are going to happen, and then they deliver these bills that aren't anywhere near what was promised. It's gone to an ultimate. It's gone further and further away from any sort of truth, capital T or small t.
That could be because of something we haven't mentioned yet, which is probably desire. Human desire is a greater motivator for behavior than, theoretical truth or something. Yeah, which is, greed, desire. So, because I want this guy to be president, because I desire what I think he's going to bring about, I'm willing to put up with any criticisms of him, any untruths that are uncovered. They don't really matter, because the prize is something I desire.
Or
and
I
it,
feel
and it
so
goes, it happens on
strongly
the
that
other side.
I don't want this other person.
Well, yeah.
It's interesting. What you mentioned at the beginning, teaching our children truth and how to be truthful, I don't see there a difference. Some people need to grow up eventually, even though if they're 70 they need to grow up and not lie to themselves. They're just lying to themselves by not telling the truth, by interpreting the truth according to their own will, whatever perspective it is. And they have to grow up. And if we have, I don't know, it's right now immature people who do politics.
So our question is what would motivate a person to do the hard work of growing up?
Yeah.
How do we get there from here?
You're right. You're right.
A miracle. We're thrown upon God. Lord have mercy. I don't know if there's any way for us to get there from here.
Well, is it not
It's a little cynical.
a tenet of all of our faiths, apparently, that left to you all use the word, our own nature, we tend, if God is this way, we can be counted on to try to go that way first. And so the only way we can more and more try to arrive at the truth or follow the truth or live a life that's truthful is to more and more have developed that internal discipline, which it is, that causes us to want to do something that is contrary to what we'd rather do, which is have it our own way, whether we like it or not. And so how do our religious faiths go about treating its adherents to exert, to learn, and to have, and to empower this internal discipline to do what's right rather than what's convenient, fun, fulfills our greed or whatever? How do we develop that in each of our religions so that truth is, number one, trying to attain it and stick with it, live with it?
I think one thing that might help is we could bring desire and analysis together. I mean, we can learn the truth that you attract more flies with honey than you do with vinegar. You achieve more through peaceful efforts and cooperation and love than you do with violence and coercion and so on. I mean, I think that's actually verifiable through history. And so we tell those stories. We bear witness to the truth. And we just keep at it, I think. We just can't give up. We got to keep bearing witness to the truth of God, which is the God is a God of all people, not just our God. We don't have a corner on God. So each in our own traditions have to bear witness to the truth that the God who made the heavens and the earth is the God of our enemies as well as our own. And we have to try to find the path to peace instead of just hammering away or getting bigger guns. So we have to align our practices with what we hope for and what we desire. We have to use desire as a motivation, because if you're just going to make war against Rob over here, it's probably not going to create the kind of life and future and planet that you really want. Yeah. So we got to try to reason with each other and show the truth that love really does outsmart and outdo hate.
And
it's
somehow
it's not evident to everyone.
Somehow that love pays, because really the greed and it's always follow the money in politics. So there needs to be some way to show that maybe you can get all these tax breaks if we're not spending whatever $1 trillion on defense as much, and by helping everyone, it might create a better atmosphere and a better getting people educated and getting people health care and those type of things might actually be a positive thing, and people can make more money that way rather than, if I think you have to show them that there's some profit in it too, at least in America.
Yeah.
For those things to happen.
I think that's good.
I believe you had a very good point, because you said that God is also the God of those who are opposing to the truth, right? And that's the fact. And actually, if God, He could change everything. He could change everyone to follow the truth and obey the truth and live in peace with everyone. So maybe we have to also acknowledge the fact that if all these things happen, it happens all with the will of God. I mean, He let that happen. So it is our test. He wants to test us, those who really are after the truth, how we behave towards our enemies, how we behave amongst each other, and that's a test. And we have to accept that fact also, and not deviate from what we're doing. Just be a good Muslim, be a good Christian, be a good Jew, and have people see it. Because we're not in a position to make people believe like we do or believe in truth. We don't have that power.
Exactly.
So we have to accept that reality, but given the fact that all these happen, we should really insist in our true way, in our true path, I think.
I remember seeing this poster in a bookstore. It just said, there is no way to peace. Peace is the way. That's what I hear you saying. Is that we need to live our faith values, and instead of just trying to convince others to follow it, we need to follow it.
That's normal. They will oppose. They will. So, and we know what those went through before Islam, before Christian, before all those who were God followers. They went through all these. We're not the only ones.
So looking ahead, as each of you have children, maybe grandchildren, do you think the rise of the internet, for example, and the social media that in some ways gives people a broader range of knowledge and understanding, so that one of my 7-year-old granddaughters who I visited last week in many ways knows a lot more about a lot of things that I don't know anything about, that maybe this understanding of humanity within a broader context that brings us more together, brings hope for the future, that the people, the younger folks, have a better view of this than maybe our generations have?
That's a tough sell. There's some stuff in the news here just lately. The founder of Twitter, I don't know his name, is lamenting the effect of that social medium he thought more openness, more sharing, more knowledge, it's going to smooth things out. He says it's had the opposite effect.
It's giving people a chance to gripe and complain.
Yeah, and bash one another, and it's caused a lot of
Because
bad
you stay
stuff.
anonymous and you think you can do and say whatever you want to. Because no one knows who you are really.
Well, even if they do, you tend to say things more easily
Yeah,
in print
That's
than you would face to face.
Correct.
And it really causes some mischief. So I don't know if it's social media and the internet, but certainly increased understanding of one another is a good thing, however it comes.
It's also made the world kind of a smaller place, and some of the other areas in the world that are less developed still news travels, it gets out of there, and they can't really hide things the way back 70 years ago. Things could get hidden for a number of years. It's I don't think you could have a mass Holocaust the way you did in World War II without people finding out about it much quicker. I mean, even in closed places like Korea and China, there's things coming out that could have been hidden for years and years without this. So in some ways, it's bringing us a lot closer. It's helping prevent certain things, and also keeping us more unified as there's no escaping that. We're not really going back to, it helps us be one big thing where we're helping save the earth, hopefully, eventually.
Mm-hmm.
It's the hope.
It's the hope. Well, on that hope, I think we'll probably thank our audience again for sticking with us. When you look through all the mischief we've shared with you today, it still comes down to basically the same reality that if we strive for truth, it always begins with me individually. So we would collectively encourage ourselves as well as all of you to again reconsider the importance of truth-telling as a means of trust building, as a means of unifying humanity, all working toward a common good of preserving the planet, preserving its people, and operating out of a system of love and care. To that end, we again thank you, and we'll look forward to seeing you the next time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are you signed off?